Welcome to 2D6 Saturday, the only viewing experience guaranteed to help you get over your country's exit from the World Cup. And this is the main event of the evening. Deadzone. Outbreak. That's right. The brand new Deadzone book has arrived, and I will be deeply probing every crevice of this fine, brand new, hot off the presses publication. And I don't know if you could see, but of course, as I do with all my paperback publications, I've taken every precaution by taping up the corners to prevent anyone who has an old collection of books that are paperback will know any kind of softback book at all. The corners will eventually start to suffer some serious wear and tear, and it does not look very good. So I like to keep my books in tip-top condition. So there's a red-hot tip for you immediately as soon as we start the show. Let's see who we've got in the chat, shall we, tonight? Because, as always, we have a packed house. We have the likes of Dice Miniature Paint Guy, Graham Rigg, the Beholder Meister himself, Mickey Jenvert, Peter Higgins that have commented so far. I'm led to believe that there are a few other people in here as well. So, well, there's only one really juicy thing we're going to talk about, but actually there is something else I want to touch on first of all, because I did receive a channel donation, not financially, but a donation of goods. And I don't think he wants to remain anonymous, unlike the mysterious benefactor who donated some money to the Andy and Rem show. But this particular benefactor actually offered the stuff live during a show, so I don't think he wants to remain anonymous. So this was from the long-time viewer South Dakota Bob. Sent me lots of Deadzone stuff, so I've got some boxes here that I'll show you. So, all Deadzone stuff. So, some Brockers. In fact, there are even more than what appears in this box here. There's actually the full set of Brockers, not just the booster. There's also the Rebs faction starter, and the Rebs support booster as well. All the models from those. These boxes are empty now, by the way, because of course I dove straight into those and started working on them, so I'll just put those down there. There was also a ton of Plague stuff as well, which I'm very pleased about, because that means that I now have more of the Plague Doges, which are already painted, but I'm going to paint over them to match the rest of my force. You can see that I've started working on some of the Rebs as well, some that I immediately want to work into my Rebs force, so another Teraton and another Craw, which is very, very nice indeed. So I'll get to work on those. And also some Forge Father stuff not pictured there. No, not just Brockers. There's also a lot of these guys as well, these Forge Guard, which I have assembled. There were 2 full sprues of these. That's actually 12 guys. I don't think any feasible game of Deadzone could ever contain that many of them. But you never know. And if I ever get into full-on Warpath as well, then I'm sure more of them will definitely not be a bad thing. It's the Brocker bike there. Very, very tasty. And a couple of these guns as well. So Forge Fathers looking like they're going to be my next Deadzone faction. It had been a plan for a while, but obviously this is going to accelerate that process. Let's see. Mickey Jenvert is a fan of North Dakota Bob rather than South Dakota Bob. I'm going to assume that South Dakota Bob is not actually his real name, funnily enough. I would be willing to bet a substantial amount that it isn't. So, anything else to talk about? I can show you what I'm working on first of all. Working on some of these brand new Stormcast Eternals. As you can see, they're gold, and they've had a wash applied to them, and that's as far as I've got so far. The base is nice and black. Haven't gone in with the ultimate dry brushing experience on them yet. And then this one as well. A little bit of work on there. Looking nice and golden. Obviously, they need a ton more work. But when there are new things to assemble, the painting usually slows down a little bit, because assembly, I find it much easier to get motivated. So if I've got a load of sprues, I'll just fly through them really quick, get everything put together. Whereas painting, it does usually take me a little bit longer to just get into the groove of it. And then once I start, I can just plow through them. But we shall see when that happens. It is extremely hot today, so I don't know how long this broadcast is going to last. It's not as hot in this room as I would think, because the window has been closed in this room all day, and it is the attic. So it does tend to get a tad hot, and I can't do a naked live stream, unfortunately. I could if I was just screen sharing the whole time, and I would have to have the camera pointing somewhere else though, just in case the screen share crashed and it flicked back to the camera, because we don't want to get this YouTube video flagged for nudity, do we? As much as the viewers might appreciate it. So I'm going to start diving into the Outbreak book now and deeply analysing, well, maybe not that deeply, but I'll definitely be looking at the units that I was hoping to see changes for, and maybe anything that I didn't have in mind as a potential change, but has changed anyway. And there's some new units as well for various factions. So I'll mainly be looking at the Plague and the Rebs, and I've been looking at the Forge Fathers a bit recently as well, of course. So the missions, had you been watching my tournament reports, for instance, then you would have seen some of these missions before. The last few tournaments have used incarnations of these missions, particularly the last tournament, which just used directly from this book prior to release. So most of the missions have 2.0 after them, and there are some brand new missions as well. So we've got 8 missions now. I think 4 of them are totally new, and 4 of them are reworked versions of the old missions. So that's nice. I'll just give you a quick taster of that page there, so you can see all the 2.0s there. So all the missions there reworked, which is very nice, because there were issues with them. One issue that I had in particular was that I never felt there were enough victory points available just on the table in objective form. And a lot of the new ones completely change that. For example, this one here, Occupy, you can see there's a ton of victory points right in the center. And Invade there, you can see there's a big juicy collection of victory points available in your opponent's half. Pretty sure you can't collect the one just outside your own deployment zone, so that's nice, because I like to accomplish a mission without necessarily killing everything. I think it makes the game a bit more strategic once you're on the table. If it's just which side can kill the other faster, then it tends to be quite a list building exercise, I think. But when there are objectives around about the table, then it forces you to think more during the game rather than prior to it, in my opinion. Other people may see it differently. Let's see. Pete Higgins has never heard of taping the corners of books. Well, I do that with all softback books. You can't really do it with hardback, but softback definitely, and it protects them from fraying. So, very handy tip. I've been doing that for years. Any book that I've got is still in really good shape because of that tip. I'm not sure if I've ever made a video on that exact tip before. Maybe my next hobby tip video will be that, because there is a trick to it. The amount of tape that you should use and the exact length and the way you fold it over. So there are ways you can go wrong with it. There are some pitfalls that people might fall into. So continuing with my analysis of the book. So I'm going to start off looking at some of the factions here. So let's see, which one of the... Oh my goodness, there is actually a rip in my book. There are 3 rips actually on this one page. In my Mason Labs page, there is a rip through it. Dun dun dun. So I'm going to have to take that up, but it doesn't matter because this was a review copy from Mantic anyway. So had I paid for it, then I would be absolutely outraged right now. I would be demanding an instant refund for that singular rip. So which is the first faction I'm interested in that we come to? It's looking like it may be the Forge Fathers, because I don't have too much interest in the Asterians. Okay, yes, so it is going to be the Forge Fathers. Now, I believe there is a new commander for the Forge Fathers. A new leader, that being the Forge Lord. I don't remember seeing him previously on the Deadzone Army Builder page that I use. I don't remember seeing him. And I have been looking at the Forge Father leaders, of course, because I've been planning out a potential force. So I've been looking at the Forge Guard Huskarl and the regular Huskarl as well, the Steel Warrior Huskarl, and looking at their various splats to see which one is the tastiest. And I felt that the Forge Guard one is possibly less tasty than some of the others, with the reduce the AP value of an attack incoming from the enemy, whereas the Steel Warrior removes a point of damage if you pass a survive test, which I felt is slightly stronger than the Forge Guard one. But the Forge Lord sounds pretty good. Spend an army special result to allow the active model to re-roll any number of dice in a fight or survive test. That sounds very tasty, actually. Because often, A lot of these, if you're taking a low model count Forge Father army, and they are really tough and beefy, the time they're going to die is when you just roll really badly and your opponent gets, let's say, 4 or 5 successes, maybe they get a couple of 8s. They get a bit lucky and you just roll 1s and 2s, and that's it. One go, your dude's just dead. That tends to be how these big tough things go down. It's just one really unfortunate roll that does it. So with that special ability there for the splat, the ability to re-roll all those dice in a fight or a survive, I think that's very, very handy. Because if the one thing that is going to kill you more often than not is luck, then you're just getting another go at it. So I like that. I think it suits the army, especially if you're going to take more of an elite list. If you're just taking a load of Brockers that are just going to get squashed anyway, then it's not going to help you that much. But I think that's quite tasty, so I would consider using him. And of course, because he looks pretty much like a Forge Guard, I don't see any reason you couldn't just use the same model for either of those, the Forge Lord or the Forge Guard Huskarl. They do look very similar. Moving on. I'm not sure whether there are any new units in here. There probably are, actually, but I'm not overly familiar with them. There's the Hammer Fist Drop Trooper. I don't remember seeing that before, so that's probably new. Just a hammer, basically. Hammer dudes. Let's have a look here. So that unit, I don't remember seeing that before. That may be new, but I'm in no way an expert on this faction yet, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on these guys. So let's move on to something I do know a little bit more about. Oh, here's the GCPS. I've played against them, but I don't own them. Marauders. The same thing there. Okay. Mason Labs is somewhere I could actually use my Plague models if I just added a few more to the mix here, because I think you do need to have a few of the regular dudes. These are mainly, I think, from the Star Saga game, these guys. This is the page with the rip in it, by the way, for anyone keeping track. But you can use Plague models in there, for example, the Aberration. So that would possibly be something I could get into in the future, but not right now. The Nameless, brand new faction, very interesting. Again, I don't know too much about them, but the one thing I do know, I've been watching other people's videos on this, is that they have a lot of psychic abilities which don't require line of sight and can do things that really mess you up. For example, pin you from several cubes away, which is pretty handy. Okay, now we're on to the Plague. This is where it gets juicy. So, of course, you probably know my favourite leader is this guy, the Stage 1A. So he's still called the Stage 1A, the Lord. And my main issue with him, other than his speed, which isn't that much of an issue, the main issue I had that prevented me from taking him recently, it really put me off, is the fact that his mutation was random. The mutation ability. When you play his splat on somebody, more often than not, it would give you a special ability that was useless for the situation at hand. Occasionally it'd be good, but usually not. So that was the main reason I haven't been taking him recently, because I do like him. He's obviously incredibly tough, rarely dies. He's slow, but it's not that big of a deal. But the main issue was just that random splat. So it was really, in my opinion, a wasted splat. Often I would just forget to use it because it wasn't good enough if I ended up with his splat. So the fact that now you can choose which one to use makes it a much more enticing prospect. So you can now choose which mutation to use with his splat. You can either give someone Resilient 1, Frenzy +1, or increase AP of 1 range fight weapon, or increase armor of a model by 1. So you do have options now. So Resilient is, I think that's a new rule. It's a bit like Tough. It's a cross between Tough and Weight of Fire, I think. So I think that Resilient is where you get to re-roll a dice on your survive test. So you could give that to someone, you give them extra armor. So you can choose whatever you want to suit a situation, and you can have this in mind beforehand. If you're sending a model into a particular area and you want to have this splat played on them and you know you've got the dice, then you don't have to rely on a random roll to get the one you want. And just, if you're going to send someone into combat, you don't have to pray that it lands on the one result that's actually going to be of any use to you. We've got a couple of new people in the chat. Sean Blake says, "Hey peeps," and Authentics Studio is in there as well. I'm not sure if we've seen that name before. We may have done. So very much like this improvement to the Plague Lord, and that's definitely going to encourage me to put him on the table more, especially now that I've got some more dogs as well rather than using zombies, because one of the reasons for using the Plague General is to create more zombies. So zombies in small amounts aren't that annoying to people. So if I'm going to be taking more dogs and less base zombies, then bringing zombies back isn't quite as juicy as potentially the Plague Lord Splat. And when you combine that with the fact that he is Tactician 2 as well, so you get an additional dice, I like it. That's probably going to work his way into my next Plague list, whenever that may be. There is a new leader as well, the Stage 3 Lieutenant, right there. And his ability goes nicely with Aberrations, Stage 2s, and Bursters, which I think... Let me just check here. Burster doesn't have Rampage, but the other two do. So it assists with Rampage, because if you use his army special result on that model, then they just don't have to make a Rampage test. And they also gain something else as well. They get +1 speed for their sprint, and they can't shoot anyway, so they're always going to be sprinting unless they're pinned. And if someone goes to the trouble of pinning them, then you just wouldn't use this result on that model anyway. You could just use it on something else. And they get that +1 speed, and they get an AP1 increase to their close combat weapon. So that is very tasty, and it makes things like the Stage 2s much more scary, because the only thing that really lets them down is the lack of AP. The Stage 2s, by the way, have gained Frenzy 1 as well, so they get to re-roll one failed result when they're fighting, which makes them very tasty. So if you were to combine those two, the Lieutenant is around about the same cost as the General, who brings back zombies. He's only a tiny bit more expensive. So if you're going to take a list with lots of Stage 2s in it, he is the guy you want, I think. Very, very nice indeed, and also handy for the Aberrations, because if there's one thing you don't want rampaging, it's something like the Aberration. The Aberration is more likely to get wounded than something like the Stage 1, because it doesn't have as much armor. The Aberration has gained tough, by the way, but he's more likely to get wounded. And because of the pose of the model, you'll find that he seems to get clear shot quite a lot as well. If you're going through a cube where there isn't any cover, you can't poke a toenail around a corner unless you sculpt the tail on him or something. So he's likely to get damaged. And then if he rampages, that's a bad time for somebody on your side, most likely. So Lieutenant seems like a good choice. It's very similar to the General in stats. I think he's identical, apart from the fact his shoot is actually a bit better for some reason. Interesting. So, moving on. I don't think there are many other changes on that page there. I think this is the first time the Murder Birds and the Bursters have been featured in the main army list. Previously, they were just in like a side supplement book. This book has full new army lists that just replace all the old books lists. So that's nice. Anything else? Got any changes here that I can see? I don't think so. If anyone knows of anything else, then let me know. But that's something one of the things I was pushing for was a change to the Stage 1's splat to make it less annoying to actually get that result. So looking forward to trying out that. Looking forward to trying out the Lieutenant in a list with lots of Stage 2s and probably an Aberration in there as well. Because the way the game's going at the moment, I don't think having a lot of Stage 3 and 4 models is necessarily wise anymore. With the way that they can't go onto half cubes, then I think having a lot of size 2 things is probably the way to go. You need some size 1 as well, but you're going to get that generally with the Plague with dogs. But if you're taking, let's say, the Stage 1, I don't think taking him and the Aberration is necessarily a good idea, depending what kind of terrain you come up against. But generally, having lots of things of that size, and Teratons as well, if you have just a list made up of all those, if you want to see what happens, go and look at my tournament report that I did recently. Look at the last game in that, and you'll see what might happen to my opponent there when he had a lot of models like that. But not a good time. So if you're taking the Aberration, then the Lieutenant would definitely be a good choice as the leader if you don't want to have lots of size 3+ models in there. So you're getting lots of sizzling hot tactical tips here. Right, we're on to the Rebs. Now, are there any changes here that I would be aware of? The main one that I know of right now is that the Rebel Grogan has gained Resilient. The Grogan is this guy here, and look how tough he looks. So I was always surprised that he died so easily. He looks like the ultimate muscle beast with a minigun. And I found it shocking that he would just drop dead so rapidly because he's only size 1. He didn't have any armor. So he's basically as squishy as just a regular trooper, even though he looks like he's this big tough creature. So he's not got tough, but he does have resilient. So he gets to reroll that 1 survive dice. So it becomes a bit more survivable, and his survive stat is 4+ as well. So when you combine those two things, he's a bit less likely to just get killed the instant he pops his head out, which is tended to happen the only couple of times, or maybe I think I may have only used him once and he died very easily. So that's a nice change, I think. It makes the rules suit the model a bit more because he looks like he should be very survivable. His survive stat already helped him out, but 1 slightly bad roll and he was just toast, being only size 1 with no armor. Any other changes to the Rebs? I'm not entirely sure because I haven't used them that many times. So, well, there are a few things that were already kind of unofficially changed, like the Teraton Shock Trooper. I think some of these were in an FAQ or something, or an errata perhaps. So the Shock Trooper is now officially in the list. And it's the Rebel Sorak has become a troop instead of a specialist, which makes perfect sense because he's not that amazing as a specialist, especially when he's competing with the likes of Teratons and Snipers and Craw and the Grogan now, and other tasty choices, even the Drone. The Z Scavenger, I don't see a lot of those. It's probably just because they're competing with such an insane array of specialist talent. So with my Rebs, I'm thinking of taking multiple Snipers and Teratons at the moment, building a list around those, and I've actually got more Rebel Troopers now because obviously one of the boxes had some Rebel Troopers in it, so I've got this guy. And also, I'm not sure if this one is actually a Rebel Trooper, but can easily be used as one. And another Rebel Commander model. I've already got one of these, but they can easily be used as snipers with the big long rifles they've got. And then that means I could potentially have 3 snipers and then pick something else as the leader. I think the Rebel Cell Leader is new, actually, a new leader here. Because my issue with the Rebel Commander, even though it's good with a really good shoot stat, and Tactician 2, which is nice, I felt that the splat was pretty awful because it involves messing with items. And anyone that has a splat that involves changing items or moving items around or looking at items or swapping an item for a different one once you've opened it, I don't pick up that many items anyway. So I'm always concerned that they're going to be booby traps. So I don't like splats that involve items in any way. You may end up with just no items anywhere near you, so they're totally useless. If there was a splat that could make any item explode on anything within like an adjacent area, that would be all right. But no, I don't think anyone has that kind of ability. So the Rebel Cell Leader, let's see what kind of splat that has. So, spend an army special result to allow the active model to switch their shoot, fight, or survive stat for a test. That sounds incredibly tasty. So this person is 8 points cheaper than the Rebel Commander. Let's see what other benefits the Commander has, though. So the Cell Leader has 1 less Tactician, which probably is reflected in the points difference there. Shoots on a 4 instead of a 3. Which it depends what you want to use your Commander for, because they are very squishy, they don't have any armor, and they're only size 1. So if you're popping them out to shoot a lot, the chances of getting killed drastically goes up. so you maybe want to hide them anyway. And the ability to swap a shoot, fight, or survive test stat, I think, is incredibly potent if you get the splat. So if you're going to be taking a list that has, let's pick some troops here that would be a good example. Who's got a really good stat somewhere? Let's see. Or anyone that has a really poor stat that you would want to switch around. Let's say, for example, the Teraton. So the Teraton fights on a 4+, but only shoots on a 6 and only survives on a 5. So if you were to use the splat, you could make either one of those not so good stats the 4+. And let's see, is there anyone with a stat of a 3+ in this list? Can't see anyone. Teraton Shock Trooper is an interesting one as well because that has a really good survive stat, but a shoot and a fight that are quite mediocre, 5+. So potentially switching one of those for the survive 4+ would be nice. The Grogan as well. And I think I might be about to sneeze. Let's mute the microphone a second. Okay, there we go. I suspect it was only a single sneeze, but if not, if another one creeps up, then we'll have to mute the microphone again. The Grogan, interesting one for that, because obviously he's going to be doing a lot of shooting. So using his 4+ survive stat in place of the 5+ shoot stat would be an interesting one if you get the splat there, because you can arm them with some pretty heavy firepower, and the only thing that lets them down a little bit, you could argue, is the actual shoot stat. So you've got a chance to switch that out if you were to use the Jack of all trades army special result, the splats from the Rebel Cell Leader. And let's see, anyone else that would make good use of that? There are a few things like the Sphere Lancer that have just a 6+ on something, which isn't very good. So you could, for example, use their 4+ shoot stat when they get into a fight that they really want to win, and change that to a 4+. So anything that has a big discrepancy between its lowest and highest stat, that would be a good candidate. The Z Scavenger, not so much, because his stats are terrible anyway. So that will be definitely something I'm looking into, because in my few games so far with the Rebs, the Rebel Commander wasn't really doing it for me. So I think I'm going to try out that Cell Leader definitely. And you can actually change the Cell Leader to a number of species as well, which is interesting, to gain different abilities, depending what kind of model you want to use. So, for example, if you make it into if you're a human, you gain logistics. Now, is that a new rule? Let's have a look. Going into the rules section here, looking for logistics. That might not be a new rule at all. It might just be that I haven't seen it. I don't see it here. So maybe I should consult the actual rule book, which is conveniently right behind me, because for some reason I've got all my Mantic books on top of this case here, because I've been referring to them very often. So let's see if logistics is in here. I'm sure this is absolutely riveting. There we go. After the recon and deploy step of setup, if this model is the leader of the strike team, you may move one item, 1 cube after resolving the recon tests. So there you go. Terrible. So I wouldn't want a human, because I don't like any ability that involves items. So let's see what the other species options are, shall we? So you can become a Rin and gain armor 1, which sounds like a good idea. You want to keep your leader alive to get that extra dice and so on, and the ability to use splats and such. Let's see. I think that there are certain commanders, I think, that can't continue using the ability after they die. I'm not sure which ones that applies to. Sphere, you can change your fight to a 6+, so that gets worse, but you gain a pretty tasty gun that has AP2, so that'd be an interesting choice. I'm not sure about turning the leader into a craw, because it seems to give you the ability to move forward on your own and get into combat, which is probably not what you want for your leader in any way, shape, or form. Let's see. So yeah, the Rin looks like a good one, just giving extra armor. And the Sphere looks like a good one, giving it a really tasty weapon because it just has a standard rifle. And you don't pay any extra points for changing the species either. So it's like you're giving it a better weapon without having to pay for it, essentially. So I think that's a really good choice. That new option there. So more leader options, something I welcome. Adding a bit of diversity to the factions. And let's see. Anything else in here? There are some elite army lists. Let's see if there are any plague ones. And you know what? I can feel another sneeze coming on. So, in fact, I'm going to turn off the camera as well. Okay, I have returned sneeze-free. Okay. If anyone has any comments, by the way, anything you want me to talk about, because we're not going to be staying on for much longer. I've done quite a deep probing analysis of some of the issues that I think are important for my factions already. So get those comments flying in. If you're watching this after the fact as well and you want me to reply to something, then that probably will happen if you drop a comment in. And as long as it's not something hideously abusive that I'll have to immediately delete, then I'm sure I'll get back to you. So I believe there are some new items in this book as well. Let's see if I can find that. This book literally just arrived today. So here are the new items that I've just found here. I'll just show you the page there. There we go. So, combat blades. So this is very much like ammo, except it's for one use only, and it gives you Frenzy 1. So it's a little bit like... Wait, which is the one? Aha, there we go. Right, I found a different one I was thinking of as well. So combat blades. Yep, one use only, range fight, Frenzy 1. So you can re-roll a dice, basically. The shock baton. Model hit by a shock baton will be knocked back. An injured model will not need to test for rampage if it begins its activation in a cube with a friendly model with a shock baton. Okay, so that's an item that you can find now. Adrenaline shot. One use, increase speed by +1/+1 for this round. So yeah, there's some more incentive to actually pick up items now, I think. Some of these actually sound good. And stimulant shot. One use, gain +1 dice for a single roll, fight or shoot. So that sounds good. Sounds better than just ammo, because you can use it for fight as well. So yeah, they actually sound good. And because most of the items generally, previously they were more favouring the shooty kind of troops, obviously with grenades and ammo and such being the main useful ones you could find, then I generally didn't pick them up. But now I might be tempted. Some of these actually look quite good. So this is if I happen to take a list that doesn't just have endless amounts of beasts in it. So if I'm just taking dogs and plague swarms and murder birds and that kind of thing, I wouldn't be picking them up anyway, because I don't think beasts can do anything with items. But much more chance of me attempting to pick items up now, I think. Previously, the only reason I would really go for items would be to try and get intel, which occasionally helps. So that's nice. There are some new abilities as well. For example, I'm not going to go through all of them, but aha, there's one I've been meaning to look for here. So this one first, evade, which is a really interesting one. If this model is hit but not killed or pinned by a shoot action, it may make an immediate 1 cube move in any direction. This may generate a fight as normal. So if you have something with evade that's actually decent at fighting, and you have it near the enemy, they might be scared to actually shoot at you. Because if they don't kill you or pin you, then yeah, you can just dive straight into a fight, which is very tasty sounding. So it adds another layer there. Now, the one I wanted to look at is weapons team, because I was a little bit confused by this, because I believe the rules changed somewhat from when it used to be 3 individual models, 2 crew and the weapon, or 1 crew and 1 weapon holding crew. But now they're all just on 1 base, which they had changed to already, but I think the rules had slightly changed. So let's see here. I believe this is a new thing because I haven't seen this applied before. So when the model is injured, they're considered to have the slow reload rule, which is where they have to use an action basically to reload the weapon when it's injured. So that makes mortars and that kind of thing slightly less juicy, because if you can wound them, it makes them not quite as good. It means they're going to have to use more command dice, for instance, if they want to be able to do some shooting. So I'm not sure if that was in effect before, because I've seen lots of these weapons get injured and never heard of that rule being applied before. So presumably that is a new twist on it. I know that used to be the case when they were individual models, because if you took off 1 crewman, then it slowed you down. But I believe that was taken away. Someone can correct me if that's wrong. Maybe everyone I've ever played against was doing it wrong. Let's see. Stealthy, is that new? When this model is the target of a shoot action, then the model may not benefit from the clear shot modifier. So it depends on the model whether that would be useful. If you model for advantage, then you can really kind of build stealthy into any model. If you just model your aberration with a long curly tail that stretches across 3 or 4 different cubes, then you're never going to be clear shot anyway. So I'm not sure about that being a rule. It's interesting, but it's a rule that you could already manipulate with your modeling skills. So I'm not sure whether that's entirely necessary to have that as a rule. If you want to make something stealthy, then just give it extra long fingernails or a long pointy nose or a gun that pokes off to the side. And if you position yourself well within cubes, then you shouldn't be getting clear shot much anyway. There's usually a bit of fence that you can just poke your toenail through, but it depends on the model. Something really small and compact that you're going to have trouble getting behind a corner, like say a Z that barely fills its base at all, then if you had a stealthy rule on that, for example, then I could see it being useful there. But most things, generally, you shouldn't be allowing yourself to get clear shot anyway. And every time I've been clear shot, it's usually because I've moved into a fight with somebody. And when you're going into a fight into the cube, you don't really think too much about how you're positioning yourself. You just say, right, I'm going in to fight you, and just plonk in the space where they just happen to fit. Whereas if you're really thinking about it, you should be considering, if I kill that model, what position do I want to be in when it's removed? And you should still be, for example, curling your tail round the corner of a ruin or behind a crate or something. So interesting, but it's something that you should be avoiding on your own, really, if you're thinking about it enough. Let's see. There are a few things that have made it actually into print now that were previously only in erratas and such. For example, the teleportability, which became a long action, and that's just in print now here, which was a big change because it meant you couldn't be pinned and then teleport. So pinning teratons is very viable. And anything else I want to touch on now? Well, I'm definitely going to have more of a read through this, and then probably in a future show, I will go more in depth into some of the stuff in here that grabs me immediately. So you can look forward to that. You can also look forward to my Forge Fathers being worked on. And this Plague and Reb stuff as well, I'm going to add to my existing forces. There's just a few things that were lacking. My Rebs in particular I felt I didn't really have the depth necessary with the models I've got painted. So it'll give me a few more options to get some of those painted up. For example, the second Teraton gives me a bit more to play with there. So anything else I want to touch on? I'll just check the old Facebook, see if anything interesting's popped up in there before I go. No breaking news, no companies going out of business or anything while I've been on the air. Usually exciting things happen just after the shows stop. Nope, doesn't look like anything juicy's happened in the wargaming world in the last few minutes. So let's wrap this one up then, because it's getting mighty hot in here. And I think you've seen enough of my face. Oh, Peter Higgins, does the Outbreak book replace all previous books, including the main rules? Kind of. It doesn't have all the rules in it. You still need the main rule book, but it does change some of the things from the main rule book. And it adds new things as well. So you would need the main rule book. But I think on top of the main rule book, this is probably the only thing you would need, because it has all the extra rules and units that were added in previous supplements. But generally in those supplements, in addition to a book, you also get models and terrain as well, generally, with those things. And you would also get some missions that aren't necessarily in this as well. Some specialist missions and campaign stuff. So the old supplements are still very useful. This is just a book on its own. It doesn't come with any terrain or anything. This is kind of, it's been described as like the Clash of Kings book for Kings of War, but for Deadzone. So it's just something to keep everything ticking over between editions and to give you a bit of an update to keep things balanced as it goes on. Because as more stuff is added in, it throws other things out of whack, as it were. And certain things are amended over time but aren't in print. So people that don't have their full errata, the latest one printed out, carrying around with them all the time, it's difficult to keep track of all the rule changes. So really, if you want to be fully up to date, you just need the rule book and this bad boy, Outbreak. Okay, I think that's going to be everything. So, let's see. I usually forget something, and then as soon as I stop the show, anything interesting developments. Oh yeah, I'm going to be playing, hopefully, the first game of Dragon Strike this week with some people online. It's not going to be a video or anything, but that should be fun. And maybe in the future, I would like to do like live hangout Dragon Strike. Just need to find people that want to be out there on the internet doing that game. And that would be something I'd like to do in the future. But I wouldn't like to do the first campaign that I'm running really visible for the public, because there may be some teething issues with it, because I'm adding in extra things to the game, for example, models from Dungeon Saga. So adding a few of my own rules as well. It's quite an open game, Dragon Strike. It's a bit like Hero Quest, but with more freedom to add role-playing elements. So it's also got an amazing VHS with it as well, which you can watch on YouTube, by the way. Just put in Dragon Strike VHS into YouTube and you'll find it. It's very, very entertaining, even though it bears very little resemblance to how the game is actually played. And anything else that's interesting? I don't think so. Right, it's time to wrap this one up, folks. So, here it is, the front cover. Deadzone Outbreak. Is it going to change the game? Well, it has, but is it going to change the game in a game-changing way? Is it a game-changing game changer? You get what I'm trying to say. I think the answer is, we'll see. And with that, good night out there. Whatever you are.